Hey, what's happening? It's T Rob here with the Biz Pulse. Just doing a special recording tonight because I wanted to talk to you about how to build, start, and utilize a podcast to grow your brand. Because I get asked a lot, about podcasting in general, and I wanted to touch on that. And just this won't be a long stream, but I wanted to talk to you and share information, potentially maybe help you if you're kind of on that bubble of like, do I want to really start a podcast and why should I? So let's get started. So in this episode, really what I'm going to talk to you about is how you can use a podcast to grow your brand. Uh, Podcasting has it's become the most incredible form of content marketing. I mean, in recent years, right? It's and it because it's a highly engaging and intimate, effective way to connect with your audience, to build relationships, to showcase your expertise. So whether you're a solo entrepreneur, a small business owner, or maybe you're a marketing manager for a huge corporation, podcasting can be an incredibly effective tool for your marketing. Um, just a little backstory if people don't know who I am a host of a podcast called The Biz Pulse. And what it's called The Biz Pulse because I get to the pulse or the heart of the business. So most everything I talk about on my channel is business related because that's the passion I have. That's my brand, right? It's who I am. I'm a business consultant, and I also am a digital marketing agency owner. So it falls into my niche. It falls into my brand. So um, that's really one of the reasons why I started. But the biggest reason why I started my podcast was because I wanted to share the knowledge that I have from 20 years of being in business with people that potentially may be thinking about starting a business or need help with scaling. So it just fit for me to start a podcast. So, number one, setting up your podcast. The first thing you need is to start your podcast is really to choose a topic that aligns with your brand, right? It should be something that you're passionate about and that you have some expertise in. It's this is important because you'll be spending a heck of a lot of time talking about this topic. So you need to make sure it's something that you enjoy, because if you don't enjoy it, you're going to burn out. You're not going to want to talk about it anymore. Anyway, just giving you that right now. Next, you'll need to choose a format for your podcast. So what I mean by format is there's different interview styles, right? There could be like you could bring guests on and interview them, right? You could talk about a certain topic, or you could do a solo podcast, or maybe you do a combination of both. Um, I most of the time do bring guests in for interviews, and we have certain topics that we talk about, typically on the business related side of things. But I do solo podcasts as well, like I'm doing right now, right? Where you can share your own thoughts. Maybe there's a topic that came to you during the day, or maybe there's a mix of both, like we talked about. But there's plenty of options. I mean, be creative, choose the best one that fits you and your brand. Once you've settled on the topic and a format, it's time to start setting up your podcast. And this involves choosing a name for your podcast, which I want to touch on that because it's very important. Because if, say, for instance, you're an expertise in cell phones, right? You wouldn't call it Tease Magazine, right? It doesn't. You see what I'm saying? Like you would, you want to make sure your name relates to your brand or your topic or niche you'll be in the middle of. Okay, um, so make sure that you're picking the right name for your podcast. The next thing is creating the cover art and the logo. That's another huge, big step in branding. I want you to think of, because many people start podcasts as just a hobby, right? Which is fine. But if you're starting a podcast to grow a brand, to help your brand that you currently have already, make sure that your cover art is very professional. Your logo looks good. It matches your brand, um, because your name and everyone judges you by your looks and your name. Okay. So anyway, just remember that. You'll be needing to select equipment for recording and producing your episodes. Um, that's not as hard as it used to be. I mean, equipment honestly has went down in pricing compared to what it used to be, and really the quality's gone up, right? So I use I don't know if you can see this, but I use a Blue uh, microphone, and I just use I don't even remember the brand on my webcam, but a 1080 webcam that I use. And I would suggest if you're doing a podcast, really make sure that you're utilizing dual monitors, because the reason I say that, and was not in my notes, but I wanted to throw it out there, is that when you're sharing a screen, which you may share a website, or you may share slides or something. It's way easier if you have a second monitor where you can look at what you're sharing, because if not, you're on a single monitor and you can't see yourself while you're presenting. So anyway, just kind of a little tip for you. So another big step is you're going to need to select a hosting platform for your podcast and set up your podcast feed. Now, the great thing about today's technology world, there's a lot of options there. Um, I personally use StreamYard, and I love StreamYard. It's very, very simple, but it has all the bells and whistles you'll ever need. And you can host up to, I think it's 10 or 12, depending on the pack, 10 to 12 people, depending on, which package you have. But I would highly recommend starting with StreamYard if you're new to podcasting, because it's very easy to use. And it's also very easy to bring a guest into. Okay. Number two is producing high quality content. And I don't mean that by, it doesn't have to be perfect, right? Because the truth is people want to see who you really are. I mean, look at me, I'm behind a camera, right? So, but make sure that you're spending time in producing the content, right? That means doing a little bit of research, preparing your topics, and scripting your episodes a bit. Now, I don't script my episodes a lot. If you watch any of my podcast on BizPulse, I like to have conversations, right? But I do look and study a little bit of who's coming in, so I'm prepared, right? Um, the other thing is, I already talked about this, but make sure that well, these are pretty powerful today too. You could do an entire podcast on your phone. So I don't want you to think you have to go out and, I wanted to touch on this earlier, so I'm going backwards, but you have to go out and buy a bunch of high dollar equipment unless you have the funds to do it, and then go for it. But just get it started, and you can build up as you go. When it comes to creating your content, it's important to keep your brand in mind, right? So your podcast should align with your brand values and messaging. Uh, it should be aimed at the audience you're trying to reach. So what I mean by that is, if I'm talking about cell phones, I wouldn't bring a guest in to talk about training dogs, right? It doesn't go together. So make sure that you keep that in mind, because I can tell you, when you start a podcast and people start seeing the episodes, they all want to be on it. And sometimes I have to tell people, you don't fit my brand. You're not the niche that I talk to. So I'm sorry, but I can't have you on there. So you have to be that way. That means, like, you really have to understand your audience and what they want to hear, right? And you need to tailor your content towards their needs. Now, I want to touch on something, because I deal with businesses a lot, and I'm a business coach and also digital marketing agency owner. A lot of people do not know their audience. So if you don't know your audience yet, I would not do a podcast. The first thing you want to do is know your audience, so you know how to talk to them, so you know the content you should be presenting to them, right? All right, another big, huge step, number 3, is promoting your podcast. And, people don't think about that. They go, "Oh, I'm just going to produce this podcast, and it's going to upload on YouTube, and that's all I really need to do." Wrong. So once you've created your podcast episode, you really start having to promote it. And this involves like a lot of different marketing tactics. I mean, social media is huge now. Obviously, you can promote it that way. Email marketing. If you have an email list, I would highly recommend using that for your podcast, and even paid advertising to get your podcast in front of the target audience. So, uh, let me talk about paid advertising real quick. Um, if you're a new podcast, or maybe you're a new brand, you really are using the podcast to try to build your brand, you might need to do paid advertising, because you might need to build your audience and bring them in to watch what you're producing, right? If you don't have a built-in audience already. So that may be an option for you. Really one of the most effective ways to promote your podcast is leveraging your existing audience. So, and maybe you don't have a big existing audience, but you'd be amazed that people will share your podcast. So if you engage and you really set your content for your audience, and you ask people directly, like, please share my podcast, please subscribe, you'd be amazed at how many people will share it with their friends, family, etc. And the other thing, I mentioned this earlier, is really make sure you're reaching out to your email list, your social media followers, and website visitors, letting them know about your new podcast, right? If you're, because just so you understand, if you start a podcast, that doesn't mean anyone knows that you started a podcast. You have to let them know. Um, you can also encourage your audience to leave reviews and ratings on your podcasts, which will really help you, because it will increase your visibility in all the podcast directories. So the better reviews, the more followers you have, the higher up you get, and then your audience starts to build. And what does that do, people? That means your brand's building and you're going to make more money, probably. Anyway, uh, number 4, engaging with your audience. So there's a lot of podcasts, and some of you may watch them, is that people don't engage with their audience. It's like they're a robot, right? So make sure, I mean, you are engaging with your audience. I mean, that's the reason why you're doing a podcast, to build your audience. That means responding to comments, answering questions, building a relationship with your listeners. Um, you can, again, encourage your listeners for feedback, suggestions for future episodes, which will help improve your content and better serve your audience. I love when people give me constructive criticism on my podcast. I know it's not perfect. So if somebody, I'll give you an example. I had a guy on not too long ago that has one of the top podcasts in the country, and he gave me some pointers, and I was so incredibly happy to listen and to learn, because that's the only way you get better, right? So in conclusion, podcasting can be incredibly effective tool for growing your brand. It can be, I mean, it can potentially be your best tool for growing a brand, by creating really high quality content that aligns with your brand's messaging. I can't say that word for some reason. Anyway, promoting your podcast to your target audience and engaging with your listeners, you can build relationships and establish your brand, um, and as the thought leader in your industry. And what I mean by that is you can utilize your podcast to become the leader in your market. And I have seen it happen. So if you like a cell phone guru, right? And you're just blowing people away with what you know about a cell phone, and you're sharing it on a podcast, people get to know who you are, and they go, this guy or gal is amazing and knows everything about cell phones. Why would they not call you Brent, right? Why would they not call you to do that, to help them? So make sure that you're staying on topic. And one thing that I didn't touch on earlier, and I want to touch on it before we get off of here, is um, whoever you put in this seat, right? Some of you may be, you may be solo entrepreneur, so it's going to be you, or maybe you work for a bigger company and you might put your marketing director in this position. really, really make sure they align with your brand. And that is the personality that you want your brand to take on. Because if not, your brand may change. And and I'm saying that because people relate to who they see and who they can hear and listen to. So for a brand, um, if I'm the brand of cereal, right? They're gonna think, man, that must be some terrible cereal. This guy's old. No, I'm just throwing stuff out there right now. But think about that. If you're putting somebody in a position to start, grow a brand, make sure you're putting the right person in the seat. And the other thing, if you're a business owner or a solo entrepreneur and you're not good at this kind of stuff, don't put yourself through the misery. And I'm not saying that because I push everyone into content, 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 because content's king, right? But if you're struggle at communication and you know you do, put someone else in the position. Bring someone on to represent your brand or to promote your brand. I mean, I do that. I'll do it for you, you know. If you want me to promote your brand or come on to talk 15 minutes about your brand, let me know. That's things that I do, and there's a lot of people that do that. So just make sure you're thinking about that when you're thinking about building a brand through podcasting. So let's kind of recap what we went through here. So our number one was just setting up your podcast. So first thing is just start, choose a topic that aligns with your brand, right? Make sure number one thing on that is make sure you're passionate about it because you're going to have to talk about that for a long time. Okay. And then the number two is produce high quality content. Now, again, I want to say high quality, meaning that you should do a little bit of research, you should prepare your topics, and you should script your episodes a little bit if you like that. But be prepared. That's the biggest thing I want to say on the high quality content. Number three is promoting your podcast. So, guys, make sure that you have a promotion plan. Like, okay, I'm going to do this video that I'm doing right now. Who am I sending it to? Who's going to see it? Because just because you start a podcast doesn't mean people are actually watching it, right? So make sure you're reaching out to your clients that you have now. If you don't have any, maybe you have to do some paid advertising, hit social media, all that kind of stuff. Number four, engaging with your audience. It's the biggest thing, right? Make sure that you're engaging with your audience, asking for feedback, encouraging comments, answering questions. It will do tremendous things for you to become the leader in your industry. And with that, I would just say in the conclusion is that podcasting can be great for brands to put a personality to what your brand is, what your product or service is, because people relate and buy from people that they like. So if you're, on the bubble, if like, hey, am I the right person for a podcast? And I said this just a few minutes ago, so I'm gonna say it again. If you struggle with just communication, I don't know if it's right for you. So, just make sure that you're putting the right person in the seat. And that's it. I think I talked enough tonight. I'm hoping that helped you. If you have or if you have questions, if you need help with potentially starting a podcast, even with the branding part of it, run it by me. I'm more than happy to help. But using a podcast to start or grow a brand is huge, and it's only getting bigger. So jump in and have some fun, and make sure that you subscribe to my channel, The Biz Pulse. We air every Tuesday and Thursday night at 6 p.m. Central Time, and I typically have some incredible guests on there. My podcast is growing, my brand's growing, so it's been good for me, and I urge you to do the same thing. You guys have a great